This is The Edge of Innovation, Hacking the Future of Business. I'm your host, Paul Parisi.
And I'm Jacob Young.
On The Edge of Innovation, we talk about the intersection between technology and business, what's going on in technology, and what's possible for business. Well, we're talking with Jacob Young, a church planting pastor in Manchester, New Hampshire. One final question. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody starting something? And I mean, I know what you're doing isn't a business, but I'm sure there's a lot of angst that you've had, a lot of joy you've had, a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of hard, a lot of easy. And what would be that one piece of advice, that you would give out to somebody?
For beginning something new, either an entrepreneur. Yeah. So it's interesting. A friend of mine here in the city he's about my age, maybe a little bit younger than me. He's an entrepreneur, and he's not a Christian. We're very good friends, and he has started up 2 restaurants here in Manchester. And I think the similarity for what our experience is that if you were starting something new, you are dreaming something into existence, and that's a very scary dynamic, and it can be a very all-consuming dynamic, whether it's a church or a restaurant or a tech enterprise, a software, an app, whatever it is. You're dreaming something into existence, and you're banking your livelihood on that happening, and so it can be very all-consuming. And what my friend and I are regularly kind of checking in on each other with is, do you have healthy rhythms so that you are a whole human being regardless of what happens with whatever you're starting out? Your enterprise is a church, an app, whatever. I think that tends to be where I would aim at for men and women, young men and women, whoever, who are starting up something new, is not only do you have the ability, are you honestly assessing what do healthy rhythms look like for me and human health look like for me, but do you have people around you, whether it's a spouse or close friends or family, that are able to hold you to that? Because I think we all have like, oh, I'm fine, I can work 80 hours a week. Well, you do 8 hours a week for 40 weeks straight, and you're going to be checked into a psych ward. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And having people who can legitimately say to you, hey, you need to reevaluate, or let's reevaluate your healthy rhythms so that you're whole. And some of that includes talking to people who have no relationship to what you're doing. I have no idea what it's like to start a restaurant, but I really enjoy hanging out with my friend, and he helps me keep my head above water. Just like, it's good to talk to somebody who has no relationships with the church, but a part of maintaining healthy rhythms is maintaining healthy rhythms with people who are just not doing the same thing that you're doing. And the reason that's important is because if you're actually killing it, doing whatever your enterprise is, you're going to be networking out your eyeballs with people that are in the same or close to the same sphere of life that you're trying to build within, right? If you're trying to do an app, you're trying to get investors who invest in the tech world. So you're still talking to the same people that are within your sphere. You need to get out and go to a cooking class and learn how to make some killer baked salmon or whatever it is you're going to make. It's a part of being a whole person, and everything about your life is not going to be consumed by what you're trying to build. So that's kind of where I would go with, if you're trying to start something new, church or not, that's where my mind goes. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
In the tech world and the edge of innovation, I am increasingly concerned about AI technology as it relates to mimicking and emulating other people, to put it kind of broadly. So I would be curious what your advice is. So this last week, you have like this whole deep fake technology that's been out on the internet for a few years now, and now this is being used in very inventive ways. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Jordan Peterson is, but he writes this article this last week saying somebody had made a website using his voice, and you could type in whatever you wanted, and it would emulate his voice from recordings. It used machine learning and AI technology to take his voice and then say whatever you're type in. So you can type in Mein Kampf, and he's going to recite it with his voice. And so now it becomes a question of, did Jordan Peterson actually say that or not? And the concerning thing that was in that article, regardless of the person involved, was that technology is now being stated, it's basically, they only need about 6 hours of audio recording to be able to produce that type of technology for anybody. And so I that hit my radar immediately, because I'm like, as a pastor, I put out 40 minutes or whatever of audio recording onto the internet every week. As a podcaster, you do similarly.
Right.
And it's deeply concerning as to, okay, how not only do I understand that, but then what are ramifications and anticipations and liabilities that I need to be aware of moving forward?
Well,
does that question or does that dynamic make sense at all?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned two different things. You were worried about AI and its applications, and then you went into a very specific example of a technology mechanism or methodology to do something. They're very different questions. The whole concept of AI or artificial intelligence, there's a point at which something becomes intelligent or not intelligent, and I don't think we're really anywhere near that. We have really expert systems that can infer things from larger sets of data than we can. We infer things, somebody is rude to you, you can infer they have a bad day, or whatever that is, or, and we can infer enormous amounts of information from tone of voice, body language, all that kind of stuff. And so computer systems will be able to be taught in some ways to do some of that, but it's not true artificial intelligence and machine learning. I mean, it is, but it's not necessarily what science fiction talks about as AI. Now, having said that, your concern is not unfounded. It's not fake. It's true. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I can emulate a voice, or I can send an email that looks like it came from you, or I can do all these different things. So the bottom line is, I think, that we are in a situation where you won't be able to trust what you consume or see. That's the only thing we can do, is that, and how do you know? I have a friend who has a Wikipedia page that is quite controversial, but he has a high-resolution scan of his signature there. And it's like, why would you put your signature up there? I think he even has a social security number on there. So now the point becomes that if you see something with his signature on it, did he sign it, or did somebody put it there from using his high-res sample? You can't necessarily know that. So then it becomes, I attest to that I indeed did sign it. Is that your signature? Yes, it is. Is that your signature? Well, I believe it is. Are very different answers. So, it will be the fact that, I could very easily post something with anybody's name that I want to. I mean, I know, just yesterday one of the senators had a fake or a alias Twitter account, that was actually him. And then it's like, well, why would you do that? And regardless of what your political persuasion is what was your point in doing that? And you look at the story that the person has been trying to tell over that. So it's very interesting. We have to reconsider the way we validate the sources of information we have.
Well, and that's what I was thinking. Like, it seems like authentication is a major issue at that point.
It is, but it's not a technical. I don't believe there will be a technical solution to it. It's extremely difficult. In the world that we've created, there are just too many cracks in the foundation. I'm very frustrated with the Equifax breach, and what has happened to that company is virtually nothing. I mean, even if they get $250 or $500 million fine, it's not a big deal, Yeah. Nobody goes without pay, and they make that in a couple of years, and everything's fine. But yet now my personal information is out and available for other people, and so what did you expect? Is, I guess, the bottom line is that with the genie's out of the bottle, there's nothing we can do to put that information back in the bottle, and our systems are built in such a way that they're built by humans. And there's a lot of mistakes that humans make, and most of the issues that we see with technology are because humans made a mistake. So I look forward to finding out what I'm going to say in the future, But, it'll be a lot about relationships and saying, no, that doesn't sound like Paul. That doesn't sound like Jacob. That doesn't sound like Bob. That doesn't sound like Julie. And we're going to have to get to it. It's going to be interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of science fiction written about things like that. Photoshop was the first thing. It's fairly easy now to Photoshop something and make a person that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And this is just the next level. It was difficult at one time to put somebody into a photo. Now it's virtually trivial. The same thing will happen with our voices. The same thing will happen with our presence, our GPS locations, and all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting new world.
Do you feel like that would be an argument then for going the digital world?
I don't think it's an option. I mean, you'll have your outliers of people who say, oh, I forego that, but your sheer absence will almost point to where you are and who you are. I don't believe there is a digital world. It's just the world. I'm not negative or positive about it. It's just the way it is. You lived on a street when you grew up and you had neighbors, and that was the fact. It was that fact. Mm-hmm. They had right assumptions about your family and wrong ones, and, whatever. They heard snippets of conversations and they formed opinions, and they heard complete conversations and formed different opinions. It's all the same thing, except there is a great ability to mess with people now.
Yeah.
So how's that?
Yeah, no, well, I'm curious, again, maybe this is a silly question. I wonder, you were saying with the AI is working with a larger data set in terms of our machine learning or kind of that realm of things. Do you foresee that the future of, even talking about the nature of your podcast, of innovation, that the innovations and entrepreneurial work that comes out in the future, could that basically be pumped out from a machine rather than from the minds and hearts of entrepreneurs? That is, if the nature of entrepreneurial work is engaging with problems and finding a solution, are computers the front edge of determining what those problems are and finding solutions rather than humans? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting. In teaching innovation, you're teaching people to think differently. And in developing AI or machine learning, we're trying to teach a computer to think or to emulate thinking by sheer volume of processing power. And it's usually the subtleties that make an innovation innovative. There's an aha moment. It's like, oh, that's what it was. Mean, I was just rewatching the introduction of the iPhone, and as Steve was dancing about with the thing, we're talking about a iPod, a internet device, a phone. Are you getting it? An iPod, an internet device, and a phone, an iPod, it's like this one device. And very interesting in reading and watching some of the videos about the gestation period of the iPhone and what happened during that time, and how some of it was innovative. One of the most innovative things was the ability for when you scrolled with your finger, that it had a rubber band effect at the bottom. That made the human interface better. Now, could a machine figure that out? I guess I'd like to think that someday it could, but before that was, when I say it now, it's an obvious thing that you can sympathize with and say, oh yeah, I see that. You can't necessarily remember how bad other devices that didn't have that rubber banding effect were to use. I do, because I'm a nerd techie, and I remember that kind of stuff. And I saw phones and devices that didn't have that rubber banding effect. And those little subtle things, I have a difficult time believing that we couldn't. So there's this thing in data science called fuzzy math or fuzzy data. And the thing is that where you take and you sort of take the data you have and you make it a little bit more and a little bit less, and you change different parameters of it to see what happens. And it has to do with chaos and things like that.
Right.
And so as we start to apply those things to data sets, I think they'll be tremendously beneficial to help us realize things that we wouldn't have realized otherwise. Now, having said that, I don't know that we're the synthesis of something. That rubber banding effect is a human realization that we needed to have a way to experience something in a different way. And so, if you were to go to a native on an island and say, here's two phones, and they've never seen a phone before, do you like the one with the rubber banding effect or the one without it? I don't know that they'd have a context to make a decision. So that's difficult, I think, for machines to do that without a lot more data about that. Now, I think you could probably build an expert system or AI that worked on just interface things. And then as the people started to feed into it different options, it could probably meld those together into a better option that we couldn't do.
Yeah, but it seems like the controlling factor in terms of what qualifies as innovation is the human factor, not merely the parts and pieces that actually end up being put together.
Right. Well, that's true. Yeah. I have a good friend that says he was giving a lecture in Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from the Library of Congress, and all the answers are there. And now, all the answers are in your pocket. You just need to know what question to ask. And so none of us are uneven. The field is completely even for us to be able to innovate. It's really a thought process. Yeah. There's nothing I intrinsically have that's better than you or than the person across the street. We are all able to innovate similarly. Now, we might have differences in the way we can execute that innovation, but a lot of that comes with persistence.
Yeah, that's the helpful dynamic, is that at the end of the day, the innovation is still a human process. It's not merely maybe that was where my question was wrong-footed. It's not merely a problem-solution process. It's a human process. Yeah. At the end of the day,
I think so. I think so. But I do think machines can assist in that. So they could probably predict better than a human could what you might like to have for dinner if you gave them the information. I had a hard day. I had this, and this, and okay, well then, if it's going to be comfort food, okay, let's make pasta. So, however you're wired, or if you're celiac disease, they're not going to suggest that. So it's all data. And it's an optimized fit. The human, we process enormous amounts of data, and don't underestimate the amount of data that we process. And we also filter out good and bad data. And machines don't have necessarily that ability to weight what's important and what's not important yet. I don't know if that's...
I appreciate you letting me get into the interviewer chair and ask you a few questions on that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've been talking with Jacob Young. Do you have an official title?
I'm the great and mighty Jacob Young.
No, I wasn't it. What were we saying? It was just yesterday that we were talking about... Oh, Mr. Awesome. That's right.
Yes.
Is that on your business card?
That is, yeah.
All right. Well, we've been talking with Jacob Young, a church planting pastor in Manchester, New Hampshire. We'll have links to his website and some of his blogs. I think it'd be good for people who are listening who might be interested to follow him and see what he has to say, as he's sort of on one of the cutting edges of our society right now. New England is really in a post-church time, and you've chosen to go and really plant a church, start a church in a hard area.
Yeah, exciting times. I've enjoyed it. It's a fun time,
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, Paul. Thanks for your time.
The Edge of Innovation is brought to you in partnership with Savior Labs. Savior Labs exists to help businesses mature and strategize for the future. Learn more about Savior Labs at saviorlabs.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Edge of Innovation, Hacking the Future of Business. For the show notes and more information about Paul, please visit paulparisi.com. The Edge of Innovation is produced by Jacob Young in conjunction with copious amounts of coffee. Music on today's episode was from bensound.com. Paul can be found on Twitter at PDParisi and on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/PDParisi. This episode, like all our episodes, is transcribed and available at paulparisi.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.